Peace, peace. Peace to everybody out there, man. Welcome to the Signature Move. My name is A.O. Baker. This is episode number 7 of the Signature Move. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, tapping in. It's also on a brand new podcast feed, so the audio is on its own feed on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as the Ringside Club feed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of the podcast platforms. So make sure you hit that subscription button wherever you find it. Let somebody know that the show dropped. But yeah, man, I'm here. My name is A.O. Baker. You can find me everywhere at I am A.O. Baker across all social media. Of course, I'm 1/4 of the Ringside Club, and we're live every Thursday night, somewhere between the hours of 9 and 10 p.m. We're live every Thursday night, and we're available everywhere, of course, all socials, all podcast platforms, YouTube, and things of that nature. So yeah, today, there's been so much going on over the weekend in pro wrestling. Obviously, everybody's been up in arms and arguing back and forth about what's been going on with The Rock, seemingly sliding in to take Cody Rhodes' spot. But, there's been enough discourse. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of that later this week, especially since tonight is Raw. And there's going to be, I would assume, something coming out of that. Plus the little press conference that they have set up on Thursday during the day. That'll definitely give us, a little more to sprinkle on top of that topic. So I ain't going to talk about that here. Here to talk about a couple of things that happened in AEW, CMLL, New Japan, and of course, leading up to my birthday is this coming Sunday, February 11th. Super Bowl is happening that day, but there's also the New Beginning, the big show, the New Beginning happening Sunday morning. So there's a lot going on. So for starters, I did this thing on the Ringside Club where I made a list of some of my favorite wrestlers that I'm going to be watching at least through the first quarter of this year. I called it the Signature Movers or whatever. So if you weren't listening to that list, I'll run through the list real quick. We had Gabe Kidd from New Japan. He's one of the guys. I had the entire stable of the Infantry, which is Carly Bravo, Trisha Dora, and Sean Dean, Lee Moriarty, Tiger Style. I had Danny Luna, the stable of Danny Luna, Flash Morgan Webster, and Mark Andrews, known as Subculture over in TNA, as a nice stable to look at and follow. Athena, Deonna Purrazzo, the Bruiserweight Pete Dunne, rest in peace Butch. Butch is dead, man. Mike Santana, current reigning defending House of Glory champion, Mustafa Ali, and of course Zack Sabre Jr. So it was kind of like, those are the list of people that I'm looking. I kind of enjoy what it is that they're doing right now. I'm going to be following them, and specifically there'll be some sort of an update each episode if one of those members of the Signature Movers do something really, really dope. Gabe Kidd, man, war ready Gabe Kidd. He had a war this weekend. At one of the Road to New Beginning shows, the one on the 4th, I believe it was, February 4th. So it was kind of like Saturday overnight, Sunday morning, our time. He had a hell of a war against Hanare. Now, this is leading up to the February 11th cage match, United Empire, which Hanare is a member of, versus the Bullet Club War Dogs, which Gabe Kidd is a member of. So on this show, they had a bunch of one-on-one matches featuring, people from both factions going up against each other. It was somewhat of a preview before we get to that cage match. But damn, bro, they beat the hell out. It's almost like how UFC has the BMF championship. This is what this was. This is like who's the baddest motherfucker in New Japan right now? It's gonna be one of these two. They're both young, especially Gabe Kidd. Gabe Kidd is 26 years old. Hanare's 31. So they're both, in Gabe Kidd's case, approaching his prime, I would say. Hanare is probably right around his prime right now. And these two are like absolute animals, beasts. And we've seen them go head-to-head in tag matches and trios matches and 4-man matches, 8-man tags rather. We've seen them, but this, as far as being a one-on-one match, so close to that cage match, is an amazing preview to see what we're going to get in the level of violence. I mean, they battled all over the arena. So I took some notes. It had to have been maybe 2 minutes, probably less. Hanare already had a lip busted open, right? He was already bleeding from the mouth. They were trading forearm shots and chops and all of that really, really early. And Hanare, not even 2 minutes into the match, was already busted open. They were clotheslining. They were throwing each other into the guardrail. There was a clothesline at one point that sent them over the guardrail, both of them into damn near the laps of the people that were sitting in the first row. And by this time, it was clear that there was no ref count. The ref was not counting to try to get these guys back into the ring. You hear the announcer, he's screaming. I'm not sure what he was saying, if it was to yell at the wrestlers to get back or yelling at the fans to get out of the way. But whatever the case was, it was just a pure chaos, a chaotic scene. And the announcer's screaming his head off. And now they're fighting up into the stands. By this point, they're brawling up into the stands, going up the stairs. They're trading forearms. They're suplexing each other. It was crazy. Gabe Kidd, you might have seen some GIFs or some videos on social. Gabe Kidd, the way that they had the stairs, he jumps over the stairwell, trying to, I guess, body press or maybe a double axe handle, whatever the case was, to hit Hanare. Hanare hit him with a right hand. The crowd was with every shot. You can hear them oohing and ahhing with every kick and, every chop, every maneuver, every potential maneuver, every maneuver defended. Finally they make it back to the ring. At one point, Gabe Kidd grabs the microphone, and in Japanese, he says, Antonio Inoki, you're welcome, which, I interpreted as, Antonio Inoki is the inventor of strong style, the founder of New Japan. He's looking at, looking up, grabbing the mic, saying Antonio Inoki, you're welcome, as if New Japan and NJPW was in good hands with me. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the way that I took that, especially with the Exodus coming up. Like, Ospreay is leaving, Okada's leaving, Tanahashi isn't in his prime anymore. So the company needs a new ace, whether it be Gaijin or, a Japanese guy. Gabe Kidd is saying, listen, I'm that guy. You know what I mean? Antonio Inoki, don't worry about it. You're welcome. They get back to the center of the ring. Now they're doing that tough man shit. They're trading chops, holding the chest out, trading chops. Hanare's kicking Gabe Kidd in the chest. They're sitting down. They just this super strong style, super bravado. Again, that BMF, that bad motherfucker, who was the toughest as far as, New Japan goes. The first pin attempt of the match didn't happen until maybe, somewhere around 15 minutes. I didn't keep time, or maybe I should have kept time, but somewhere around 15 minutes of the match, that was the first, couple of pin attempts. So they were really just here to beat the hell out of one another and prove, to each other and probably to themselves and to the audience who the toughest member is. And of course, there was a diving headbutt from Hanare that knocked both of these guys out. 10 count from the referee, ended up as a draw, double knockout. And they were supposed to be on the Road 2 show the next day on the 5th. And New Japan, they made that announcement that says, yeah, these guys aren't in any kind of physical condition to, to compete tonight. So, they'll probably be ready when it comes time for the cage match. But damn, like that was, nothing fancy about this. This wasn't, this was not about technique. This was about toughness. There was nothing technical about this match. This was kicks, chops, right hands, forearms. I think I might have seen a Blue Thunder Bomb at some point. You know what I mean? Like a couple of suplexes here and there, brain buster. But there was nothing technical about this match whatsoever. This was absolutely 100% about who the toughest member is. So by the time we get to, this Sunday, February 11th, make sure you wish me a happy birthday, by the way. We'll see both of these guys. But it's a 5-on-5 United Empire versus Bullet Club War Dogs. But Gabe Kidd, man, he's one of those guys, and I think this match is probably, so far, this is at least one of my favorite matches so far this year. We're only 2 months in, not even a complete 2 months in. So, all through January and so far through February, this is definitely one of my favorite matches. I saw a bunch of people talking about this match on social media, on Twitter, on X, whatever. So make sure you, if you haven't seen it, tap in. It's on New Japan World. Definitely give that a look. And, a good couple of shows. I think this might have been, obviously the highlight, but over the course of the two days, I have, the 5th, the day 2 of this particular Road 2 series, the back-to-back. I have that going right now, the main event going. It was almost like a faction gauntlet match between just 5 guys and Los Ingobernables de Japón. But, yeah, man, check that out. Speaking of Antonio Inoki, I'm going to bounce around and jump around a little bit topic wise. But speaking of Antonio Inoki, Gabe Kidd again saying, Antonio Inoki, you're welcome. I've been reading this book. I started reading this book during the week called Lion's Pride. It was written by Chris Charlton, who's, one of the commentators on New Japan World, one of the English commentators on New Japan World. And it's basically a history. I don't have the year that it came out in front of me, but this was definitely during, I think Tanahashi was still the ace, or still recognized as the ace. You know what I mean? So this is a few years ago, but this is basically a history of New Japan. And I picked it up. Shouts to Lyric, at Lyric Wrestling. I was listening to something, I think it was a Wrestle Rap episode that I had listened to where she was a guest along with Mighty Vin. And I believe she mentioned this book. So while I'm listening to the episode, I Googled it. I found it on Amazon. I bought the digital version for the Kindle. But there was a couple of things that I didn't know, and I haven't read the entire book, but I've been taking notes. And so far through the book, I think there might be some things you find interesting. I didn't know. Maybe you knew them. I didn't. For starters, there's a guy by the name of Ricky Dozan, who, as soon as I read the name, I immediately recognized the name from a promo that was cut by Don Callis on Dynamite. And he was basically hyping up Takeshita, but he said something along the lines of the most important, wrestling figure from Japanese, or something to that effect, since Ricky Dozan, as far as talking about Takeshita. So the book, really starts out as far as giving an idea of how New Japan was founded. You can't tell that story without Ricky Dozan. He was actually born Korean. Ricky Dozan was Korean, but he changed his name to Ricky Dozan and started training in sumo, and I guess he got pretty much as far up in sumo as he was going to get because he was Korean, and he started training pro wrestling from there. And he would go on to create the JWA, which was the Japanese Pro Wrestling Alliance. This was the first wrestling company in Japan, and it was kind of like the Japanese territory of the NWA. So this is 1953. The company was started. It ran for about 20 years, from 1953 to 1973. But that was created by Ricky Dozan. And he ran it until he died in 1963, which was a crazy story in itself. Like, he was running around, he was making, bad moves as far as the Yakuza or the underworld, the mob over there in Japan. But he had beef with them, and he ended up getting stabbed in, I believe it was like a nightclub or some kind of after hours spot. He got stabbed. He didn't die from the stab wound. He died because the knife was soaked in urine, right? So he died from an infection. It was like a swollen stomach or something like that he eventually died from. So it wasn't necessarily the stab wound. He wasn't stabbed to death, but it was the urine that, like, how crazy is that you get stabbed by, a knife soaked in urine, and that's the way that you go out. But the company would go on to last for about another 10 years after he died in 1963. It would go on to about 73. But this is important to the story of New Japan because Ricky Dozan trained both Antonio Inoki and the Giant Baba, right? Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki. If you know nothing else about those two names, understand that those two names, Inoki founded New Japan, obviously, and Giant Baba founded All Japan Pro Wrestling. New Japan Pro Wrestling, All Japan Pro Wrestling. So those two, along with Pro Wrestling Noah and, Stardom, which is under the same Bushi Road company that New Japan is on under right now. There's a bunch of companies, but those are the ones that I would say are the most popular. Maybe Tokyo Joshi Pro is another one, as far as like the most popular companies over in Japan. But, Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba, two of the biggest and most important figures, and they were not only trained by Ricky Dozan, but they wrestled for JWA. He dies in 1963. The company goes through a bit of a down period over the next few years. Inoki and Baba both left JWA in 1972 and started their own companies. New Japan was started in January of 72 by Inoki, and AJPW, All Japan, was started in October of 1972. So here's where we get in, specifically as it relates to this book, Lion's Pride, into just talking about New Japan and the history of New Japan. So again, like I haven't read the entire book, but there were a couple other things that stood out to me that I didn't know. For starters, if you look at the logo, that lion mark, it says King of Sports. That was a nickname or a moniker that Antonio Inoki came up with in 1976. And it was because there was always questions about pro wrestling. Kayfabe was being broken left and right. There was questions about pro wrestling as to whether it was legit or not. So one of Inoki's efforts to keep kayfabe alive, so to speak, was to give New Japan not this King of Pro Wrestling moniker, but King of Sports, right? This is legit, and the best, athletes and competitors are over here in New Japan. If you're familiar with Inokiism, that would come a little bit later on. But Inoki was always like kind of fascinated with, mixed martial arts, fascinated with just other fighting styles. And in his attempt to keep New Japan looked at as a legitimate sport, or pro wrestling looked at as a legitimate sport, and New Japan kind of being on top of that heap, on top of the pile as far as pro wrestling and pro wrestling as the toughest form of mixed martial arts. Inokiism would come into play later on, where he would, not exactly like the Brawl for All, but in a sense send his wrestlers to compete in other legitimate sporting types, karate. And, Inoki had that match with Muhammad Ali, in a promotional match, which in and of itself is a crazy story. When you look at how many people, Shea Stadium was sold out to watch that through closed circuit TV, right? So not to watch it live, in person, but to watch it on the big screens. They sold out Shea Stadium. But anyway, back to King of Sports. That nickname was kind of, just to give a little bit more legitimacy to New Japan, because of questions about pro wrestling. And just finishing up, a couple of interesting facts about the IWGP World Championship or Heavyweight Championship. For starters, in something kind of similar to the Continental Crown, it was a tournament. So there was this IWGP League. So I think the first one was in 1983, but it was basically designed to be, a tournament. And then once after the first one, the champion was crowned, the next year there would be a league. Like, I guess it was round robin. I'm not sure if it was round robin or maybe knockout or maybe a hybrid. But the winner of the tournament would then go on to face the previous year's winner, who was recognized as the IWGP champion. So the first one was in 83, and the finals was Antonio Inoki versus Hulk Hogan. And, Inoki was probably booked to win that match, but Hogan won it because he legitimately knocked out Inoki. His finisher was called the Axe Bomber, I believe. And he hit it, the first time he hit it, whatever. The second time he hit it, Inoki goes out of the ring, hits his head, and is legit knocked out, and they couldn't revive him. So, the people that were at ringside that came down there, his seconds, they, kind of picked him up and rolled him into the ring, but he was still wasn't responsive. So the referee called it as a win by knockout for Hulk Hogan, and Hulk Hogan was the first IWGP champ. Couple of years later, they take that tournament, that title, and they turn it into what we know of now as the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. This was the version that I think up until, a couple of years ago, I think it was over the pandemic. It was either 2019 or 2020 when it was unified with the Intercontinental Championship. I think Naito held it. So the version that we see now that is currently held by Naito again, this title was unified with the Intercontinental. But anyway, I think Inoki was the first champion. But what I found interesting was Vader was the first foreign wrestler, first gaijin to hold this championship, and he won it. It was vacated because, somebody was injured, so they had a tournament to determine the new champ. The first wrestling event in the Tokyo Dome, right? So the Tokyo Dome was open March 17th, 1988. This event, called Battle Satellite, took place April 24th, 1989. And Vader, Big Van Vader, was the first person to win it. So on the first night, the opening, or not the opening of the Tokyo Dome, but the first wrestling event or at least major wrestling event in the Tokyo Dome, Vader becomes the first gaijin, the first foreign non-Japanese wrestler to win that title. I thought that was really cool. And Vader was also, Big Van Vader got his name in New Japan, which I didn't know either. It's kind of based on like a, Japanese folklore. There was a warrior that they based that character around, and he was given the name Big Van Vader while he was in New Japan. And he would go on to hold that title for, 2 more times. He was a 3-time IWGP champion. But yeah, man, there's a couple of things. So far, I've been really enjoying this book, and as I come across a couple of more things that that I learn, I'll mention them right here on the podcast. But I thought that was dope. Vader got his name, Battle Satellite, that first event in Tokyo Dome. Became the first gaijin to win that title on the first wrestling event inside the Tokyo Dome. That's a lot of history right there. So yeah, check that book out. It's on physical. I bought the Kindle, but it's available in paperback also. On Amazon. Shouts to Chris Charlton. It's called Lion's Pride, The Turbulent History of New Japan Pro Wrestling. So pick that up on Amazon. So more that came out of this week. Speaking of New Japan, CMLL has been a longtime partner with New Japan, and they're a recent partner of AEW. There was the announcement that there would be some members from CMLL, some wrestlers from CMLL. Turned out to be Hechicero, Mascara Dorada, Mystico, and Volador Jr. But during the week on Dynamite, they were sitting ringside during a match that Jon Moxley had. And at one point, Jon Moxley walks over them, taunts them, they get up. So fast forward, the match is over, and they jump Jon Moxley in the ring, and you see, they made mention on commentary that the BCC was not there that night. So some other wrestlers turned out to be Cool Hand Ange, Angelo Parker, Daddy Magic, Christopher Daniels, and Matt Sydal. They ran down to kind of run off the CMLL guys. So that's what they made that match, that 4-on-4. It was supposed to take place on Rampage. So it took place on Rampage, and it was a great highlight match, a good spotlight match for the CMLL guys, with Hechicero eventually pinning Christopher Daniels for the win for the CMLL, for Team CMLL. But this Saturday, Hechicero had a match against Bryan Danielson. And I wondered when I saw that match, because I was familiar with Mystico. But I wasn't familiar with the other three, and it turns out that I don't know if it's Mascara Dorada or Mascara Dorada. I'll get the correct pronunciation. So by the time we get back on the pod, whether it be this Thursday or the next episode next week of Signature Move, I promise I'll have it correctly pronounced. But I was slightly familiar with him because he's been popping, 22, 23 years old, but wrestling like a veteran as far as how good he is. And then Volador Jr. has been around forever, but I really couldn't say that I've seen a Volador Jr. match before Friday. Same with Hechicero, same with Dorada. So anyway, because that match was against Bryan Danielson, I'm like, why specifically is this one-on-one match happening? Because it seems like Bryan Danielson wants to have these matches. So what would make him kind of handpick Hechicero if that's the case? Pure speculation, obviously. Hechicero, known as like the alchemist of the ring, right? One of the best technical wrestlers in the world today. And I'd never known, and this is right up my alley. I didn't know, for starters, that he had a match some years ago with Zack Sabre Jr. in PWG. And I had no idea. Had no idea whatsoever. So I haven't seen that match yet. But I just Googled around and watched a couple of clips and a couple of matches, and the guy's incredible. And he had, there was some moves I've never seen before. Like, for instance, that guillotine leg drop, looked like he was going for a head scissor takedown, and it ended up being a guillotine leg drop. They had a fire match, man. A fire match. And again, just some moves and maneuvers that I hadn't seen before outside of the couple of clips of matches from Hechicero. So he's a new favorite of mine. Rocky Romero is the man. by the way. You know what I mean? It seems as though he's the link between um, New Japan and CMLL and now AEW, and Rev Pro is right there. But the major territories in wrestling, he's getting these companies together and helping to be the liaison to to these three companies, man. So Rocky Romero, man, is the guy. You know what I mean? Like really the plug. He's the plug. Um, and now we have, I believe, on Wednesday, Bullet Club versus CMLL. That's happening on Dynamite. But that match was super fire from Collision. Bounty Hunter Brian Keith was announced as being officially All Elite. They got that graphic, man. Congratulations to Brian Keith. Um, First time I saw him, I became a fan. So it's good to see that he's contracted now. We're going to see more of him. And obviously Dynamite is a loaded show coming up this Wednesday. There's so much going on. Obviously the big announcement, there's a bunch of speculation as to what that Tony Khan announcement is going to be. But, that's a big match that's coming up. The standings are back, by the way, so that looks dope. There's a lot happening. We got that Sting and Darby Allin tag match for the titles against Ricky Starks and Big Bill's. A lot happening. So Dynamite looks like a really, really good card coming up this Wednesday. But yeah, that's happening. Speaking of CMLL, I tapped in. They had Grand Alternativa Friday night, which is basically a tag tournament. The tag teams are like veterans and rookies. And the winner, the finals, speaking of Mascara Dorada, he was teaming up with his rookie Neon. It's amazing how he's 22 or 23 years old, but he's the veteran, right? But he was teaming up with this dude named Neon, and they teamed up against Mystico and Brillante Jr. Fire match. And if you're not like used to watching, Lucha Libre outside of like the Lucha Libre matches, maybe from WCW or the Lucha Libre matches on AEW today, it's a style, at least the aerial style, a lot of head scissors and dives and topes. But it's very, very interesting when they also mix whatever the storyline is into the matches. What the finish here ended up, and again, like these are 2 out of 3 falls matches, by the way, right? So, and you can have 2 falls at a time. Tag matches in Lucha Libre, for example, you don't need to like slap hands to tag in and out. It's, if somebody gets knocked out, a wrestler runs in and now they're the legal man. But you can have like simultaneous falls, and this match ended with a pinfall and a submission pretty much simultaneously. And, those 2 falls at the same time gave the victory to was it Mystico, I believe, that won? Mystico and Brillante Jr. Great match. So if you haven't watched it, go out of your way to find a way to watch it. CMLL just announced that they have a new subscription offering, so you can watch on their YouTube. So head over to the CML YouTube and find that match, man. Take a watch, take a gander at that match. But yeah, a lot of good stuff to tap into. Like I mentioned, we'll see what the fallout is of, The Rock going face to face with Roman Reigns, what happens on Raw, what happens at that press conference on Thursday. Dynamite looks incredible. There was an NXT show last night, so there's a lot of fallout that'll happen tomorrow on NXT television. But again, I'm looking forward to, or the show that I'm looking forward to the most is happening on my birthday, February 11th, the New Beginning show. Zack Sabre Jr. versus Bryan Danielson. They've had 4 matches throughout their career, with Bryan taking 2 of them and Zack Sabre taking 1 of them. I've seen 2 of them. I saw the first one. The first 2 happened when Zack Sabre Jr. was, a rookie pretty much. Wrestling in I think the first one was like a hotel lobby, it looked like. And he was pretty much a rookie, and they wrestled, and I think Bryan was impressed. They had another match that I want to say was in WXW in Germany, I believe I read. And I haven't had a chance to see that match, and I guess that's the match that that Zack Sabre Jr. won. But there were those two matches, and then fast forward to the match that happened last year at Wrestle Dream, where Zack Sabre is in his prime. He's put on, looks like 50 pounds of muscle, so he's in the heavyweight division now. Bryan Danielson is on his way to finishing up his full-time wrestling career. And this is the first time that they're going to have this match in Japan. And if you're familiar with what Zack Sabre Jr. was pissed off about after the last one, he said that this was supposed to determine who was the better technical wrestler between the two of us. And because Bryan Danielson won with the Busaiku knee and not a submission, he's not accepting that. So it looks as though that both of these guys are going to go for a submission victory, which is incredible. And on New Japan, on commentary over this past weekend, on the show on the 5th, Chris Charlton was making mention that because of Ospreay leaving and because Okada's leaving, this main event scene and this world title picture is more wide open than it. And Tanahashi's really not in his prime anymore, by the way. He's the TV champ, but he's not competing for a world title anytime soon. At least I don't see it happening. The world title picture is very, very wide open now. And it's open for Zack Sabre Jr. should he, find himself in that picture very, very soon. It's very possible that he's, an IWGP champ this year. We're going through the New Beginning shows right now. Again, the last one, New Beginning in Osaka, is February 11th. Then we have that Fantastica Mania tour, speaking of CMLL. That runs from the 12th through the 19th. There's an anniversary event March 6th. And then we get into New Japan Cup territory. So the New Japan Cup starts, that runs from March 7th to March 20th. I don't know if Sabre Jr. is going to be as part of the cup. Maybe he is able to win that cup and go on to challenge for the championship there. The road to Sakura Genesis starts March 30th. That runs through April 5th. We have that big show in Chicago on April 12th, Windy City Riot, where there are a couple of matches that are announced right now. Mox versus Naito. It just says singles match right now, but Naito is the current champ, so who knows if he's able to retain that championship. That'll be a world title match, Mox versus Naito, and of course Mustafa Ali against Hiromu Takahashi. That match is happening, but we'll see what happens as far as the main event world championship title picture. But they made it a point to say, listen, man, like, it's wide open right now. And Zack Sabre Jr., if he's able to secure that victory over Bryan Danielson, a big name, a big event, who knows, as far as the rankings go and the standings go and the championship committee and all that goes, that IWGP governing body, they might put him right there and give him a shot. So that's a match that I'm looking forward to. Obviously, Okada's leaving. There's been a lot of conversation about that, but the last match, possibly the last match, Okada versus Tanahashi, the biggest feud, the biggest rivalry in recent years, I mean, maybe ever in New Japan history, Okada versus Tanahashi, ace versus ace. That takes place on the 11th. And then we have what is Ospreay's last contracted match. It's a steel cage match, Bullet Club versus United Empire. There's a lot happening here. Akira, speaking of the United Empire side, Ospreay's leaving, so there's that part. Cobb was injured, so he didn't wrestle this weekend. We'll see if he's ready. Hanare had that war against Gabe Kidd. We'll see what physical condition he's in. TJP, a lot of people are saying he might be the guy to take over leadership for United Empire. Francisco Akira was, hung by a chain yesterday. So we'll see what physical condition he's in. He didn't want to compete in this match in the first place. You know what I mean? So we'll see if he's even able to compete, if there's somebody that steps in on the United Empire side. We'll see. A lot of moving parts in the United Empire side. But those are the 5-on-5 against Driller Maloney, who I think they made mention. I think he has a torn meniscus or something like that. So his knee is, damn near as bad as Seth Rollins' knee is right now. Clark Connors, Gabe Kidd, again, that war against Hanare. What shape is he in? Alex Coughlin, and of course the current leader of of Bullet Club, the War Dogs, David Finlay. We saw that there was some backstage, commentary a couple of shows ago where Finley pretty much told Gabe Kidd to shut the fuck up while I'm talking. So it was that foreshadowing of some friction there. Gabe Kidd walked off. So what kind of, what kind of terms are they on? You know what I mean? We'll see if that happens to take a, if that comes to play, if that makes an impact on what we see during this cage match. But really, really, I mean, this is a big card. Big card. We got the tag team championships, Chase Owens and Kenta against El Phantasmo and Hikuleo. It's a lot of big matches, but those three matches I think are the biggest and the ones that I'm looking forward to the most. Okada, Tanahashi, Sabre Jr., Danielson, and that 5-on-5 United Empire versus Bullet Club cage match, which would be the main event. 8 matches on this card, February 11th. Yeah, man. Looking forward to it. Make sure you wish me a happy birthday. So yeah, this has been episode number 7, the signature move. Subscribe to the new feed, subscribe to the Ringside Club feed, and catch us live this Thursday night, the Ringside Club. Peace to and a thank you once again. Last Monday I was on All Elite with Keeks, so shouts to Keeks for having me on as a guest. Ringside Club are doing an episode. We were invited by the Black Guy Wrestling Pod, so we're going to be doing an episode in March. I don't have the date in front of me, but look forward to that. Stay tapped in. We'll obviously make more announcements, but we announced that a little bit on social media over the weekend, so make sure you tap into those guys. We had them on as guests last year, so it's going to be fun to chop it up with those guys. I'm speaking to a couple other people about, different collaborations. You might see me here, you might see me there. So yeah, stay tuned, man. Again, follow me everywhere. I'm at I am A.O. Baker. Subscribe to the Signature Move. Subscribe to the Ringside Club. Follow the Ringside Club across all socials as well. And until Thursday and until next week for episode 8 of the Signature Move, I bid you adieu, man. Peace.